Thank you. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Roll call.
Roll call. And as I call the roll, if you can announce your location, the state and county, please. Chair Mark Piotrowski.
Here from Lathrup Village, Oakland County, Michigan.
Vice Chair Hammond.
He's on
Vice
mute.
Chair Hammond.
He's
Did
on
he
mute.
leave?
You're
He's
on mute.
I didn't think I was on mute. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah. I am here present, Lathrup Village, Oakland County, Michigan.
Thank you. Secretary Thompson.
Here from Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County, Michigan.
Thank you. Board Member Fobbs. Board Member Fobbs. No. Board Member Hulieza.
Here in sunny, warm Lathrup Village, Oakland County, Michigan.
Board Member Cantor. Board Member Cantor.
Unmute.
You're muted, Bruce.
Damn. Okay, yeah. I am here, Lathrup Village, Oakland County, Michigan.
Board Member Stansberry.
Here, Lathrup Village, Oakland County, Michigan.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is approval of the agenda. Everyone's had a chance to take a look at the list before us. Have any comments, questions, recommendations, adjustments? Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as written.
I'd like to make
Mr.
a motion
Chair?
to approve.
Oh.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I wondered if, I'm jumping to section 7 on old business and tabled items, if the members would want to consider the order in the anticipation that time might be of an issue later. And in other words, prioritizing those items.
I agree with that. If there's, I'm in agreement. Maybe there's a adjustment to the order. Maybe we want to make sure we get certain items covered that require maybe more attention or have not been delved into just yet.
Well, it appears that we've dealt with item 7B, so it's a matter of perhaps considering which of the items A and C would come first.
I can the only advice I will give you is that I know that our guests are here specifically to listen in on our discussion regarding 7C. So if that factors into your prioritization.
Yeah, and I guess 7C as well, you know, we're trying to move, council and Scott and Jill are trying to move steadily forward on getting to our thoughts on cannabis and set. So I guess I would prefer to see that one go earlier rather than later.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the agenda with the movement of let's say C to A, and then let A and B fall in sequential order after that.
Are you making the motion?
I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting out there for a motion. Yeah.
All right, I'll make a motion to change item 7C to make it 7A and allow the other two, A and B, to slide down, each slide down a notch.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye. Oh.
Nope.
Roll call. Roll call. Board Member Fobbs. Still not here. Board Member Hammond.
Yes.
Board Member Hulieza.
Yes.
Board Member Cantor,
Yes.
Chair Pietrowski,
Yes.
Board Member Stansberry,
Yes.
and Board Member Thompson.
Yes.
Motion carried with the stated changes.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next item of the meeting minutes for our regular meeting of September 15th.
Make a motion to approve the minutes from September 15th, 2020.
Second.
Those in favor?
Roll call. Board Member Hammond,
Yes.
Board Member Huliza,
Here. Yes.
Board Member Cantor,
Yes.
Chair Pietrowski,
Yes.
Board Member Stansberry,
Yes.
Board Member Thompson,
Yes.
and Board Member Fobbs. Still not here. Motion carried.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, public comment regarding any items that are not listed on the agenda. If anyone from the public would like to make a comment or speak at this time? Okay, not hearing anything. I will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is new business. Set public hearing date for the R1 district amendment parking as a special land use. So,
Can give you a quick introduction on that item. And actually the attachments for that were in the study session packet, I believe. And so for the benefit of our planning commissioners who weren't here the last time we talked about this, which I think was, well, we did briefly talk about it in this is dated 2018. That's the last time we created it. I think we touched on it again briefly in 2019 when we talked about, or maybe it was later in 2018 when we talked about the parking mitigation as it related to the Southfield Road environmental assessment that was being conducted. They were looking for strategies from the city that showed that the city was working on opportunities to address the parking along Southfield Road. So that was the last time I think we talked about it. So you'll see in this, the language, the items in the text in red would be additional new language that isn't in the current ordinance. And the thought behind this ordinance was to allow, in certain circumstances, the properties behind the residential or the commercial corridor on Southfield Road to be used as parking to permit and facilitate the redevelopment of parcels along Southfield Road. So for many years, we've recognized the limitations of the narrowness of the lots, the shallow lots on Southfield Road, as limiting redevelopment in the corridor. There just simply isn't enough room to allow for buildings to be renovated or substantially improved in terms of maybe replaced. And with a lot of buildings that are bi-level buildings that are getting dated and becoming obsolete, your master plans, the last two, and the current master plan, all talk about facilitating and enabling redevelopment along this corridor with updated modern buildings. So we had talked about a couple of different things. In fact, in the original idea behind this was in 2009, the first master plan that envisioned the village center area. And on that future land use map, the area all along the edges of the corridor abutting residential was called the parking expansion area. In 2014, we modified that because we felt that it was a little bit, it was called the mixed use expansion area. And we felt like that was a little bit misleading because it wasn't that the city intended on expanding the commercial activities into those areas. It was really just identifying those areas as being parking. So on the 2014 plan, we recognize that area as parking expansion possibility. So we talked about in 2015 a couple different ways in which we could allow that to happen. We'd considered rezoning, we had considered creating a special district, an overlay district, but really seemed to make the most sense was to just permit this type of use in the residential district, in the current R1 district, as a special land use with very specific standards associated with it. The reason for this is if we looked at an overlay or we looked at a rezoning, we wouldn't want to affect some of the existing residential properties that are there. We wouldn't want to make anybody non-conforming. This just allows parking as an extra use with some specific standards. So as you'll see in the intent of this, this changes the intent of the R1 district and recognizes that that limited off-street parking in this district adjacent to the mixed-use districts only, so we're setting the stage, we're saying where it is, may foster quality redevelopment of those parcels that align with the city's vision for a vibrant pedestrian-oriented commercial corridor. So we're setting the stage here for what we expect. And then in part 2, allowing parking as a special land use with reference to the conditions. So parking that serves customers, employees of uses within 500 feet. What that means is not that parking would be 500 feet off of Southfield Road into the middle of a residential neighborhood, but that perhaps a vacant lot could be turned into parking and serve a use that may be further down. Because the parcel, as you'll see in the proposed section 4.16 would say that the parcel needs to share a lot line that abuts the MX district or is adjacent to the alley, or share as a north or south lot line with a parcel that's currently developed as a parking lot and was within 150 feet of the Southfield Road right of way. So we're making it very specific. We are not saying that this is something that's going to go into the neighborhood. It's very defined in terms of its boundaries. And number 2, which I think, oops, sorry, I'm scrolling on my own. The standard on number 2, and I think this is important because this gets to why there would be a trade-off for a residential lot. And it's assumed that maybe this is a vacant lot or a lot that's maybe somehow substandard. But that substantial investment will be made into the redevelopment of the parcel that the parking will serve. And the ground floor uses in the redeveloped parcel will include restaurant, retail, or residential uses. And then in so doing, we've said that the standards of the Village Center district shall apply. So the mixed use district doesn't have specific standards, but referring to those standards of the Village Center. So in essence, we're saying that if the city is going to allow a residential parcel to be converted into parking, that should specifically facilitate and enable a quality redevelopment happening on Southfield Road. And then there's some additional standards associated with the parking lot can't be used for outdoor sales or display. And there's some specific landscape standards. And really that is the sort of the highlights of that. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about that. We put it on the agenda as that it could be a request to set a public hearing, and that's up to you.
Okay, I guess we'll entertain questions from the commission at this time. I guess when I looked at this, my mind went back because I've seen this a few times in the past already. It's a detail item. I go to the layout on page, let's see, I guess this would be page 4.
Mm-hmm.
And as a I guess a gesture, something that helps I guess ease the consideration of this from maybe a residence or residential, particularly any adjacent residential properties which might be adjacent to or are adjacent to a potential parking that expands into the residential district, would be to make sure that the street front on the residential streets is has a good buffer of green space. So when I take a look at the imagery here, one of the things that comes to mind is not just the corner islands, but the island on the central bank of parking. I'd prefer to see more green space there and cut a few parking spaces out to just kind of emphasize or to further set back the vehicles from pedestrian traffic at the sidewalk and just to keep a I guess a greener approach into the neighborhoods themselves. And I know that's a very specific thing. So if there's anyone else has other questions or other thoughts regarding this, I think aside from that, I think given the most recent site plan review effort we went through, it kind of draws focused attention on how important something like this may be as a means of addressing parking issues, not just I know we had identified other potential properties where parking in the right of way is not technically meeting the criteria for the zoning ordinance. We had some good examples of that in our previous meeting, and so I think this is a timely thing to be considering.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mark. It totally makes sense to me. There's nothing in here that I had any questions about. The reasons for it as described here totally make sense in terms of supporting both the residents nearby those areas and the businesses in those mixed use areas of the city. And yeah, the consideration of ways to kind of mitigate the noise or overlap of business function from residential function. It's pretty clear here that that's the intent of all the landscaping and other requirements in here. I like it.
I think the
Enhance the landscaping section. Sri, who's sitting in here quietly, muted, had some comments that she wanted to incorporate in, and we might fix up the graphic a little bit, enhance it. It's a little bit, now it's almost, well, it's probably 4 or 5 years old by now, that maybe we can update that as well. So I think we'll be just including what you had suggested, Mr. Chair, in terms of increasing that island along the side street. And I think some other elements as well, making sure we have enough room for the things that we've said we wanted to have in there.
Okay, that reminds me of one other thing and I don't know if it technically reads like a conflict or not, but with reference to access to the parking off of the residential streets, there was a criteria for not closer than a certain distance from the property line.
Yeah.
And related to that, there's the 10-foot setback, and then as this illustration is indicated, that would push that dimension to 30 feet technically, rather than 20 feet. And I think there was a reference to 20 feet for a curb cut or entry drive to the parking.
Yeah,
So
parking lot ingress and egress shall be at least 20 feet, which I think it would be, because if you had a 10-foot buffer, the parking space itself is going to be 20 feet.
Right. I guess my only point there is maybe, I mean, there could be a situation isn't necessarily going to be that you have parking immediately adjacent to the limit of the setback. So, I mean, if there's an entry drive that's serving a row of parking on one side versus another, I guess technically that would probably be addressed in the 20-foot setback for the entry drive. So.
We can probably also consider limiting the number of curb cuts too, like they can have a loop around within the parking lot rather than having 2 curb cuts on the residential driveway. That will eliminate parking closer to the streets.
Or you mean closer to and also maybe the the entry
buffer.
drive not as close to the neighborhood.
Right, and then maybe then the green space can be extended along the drive where there's no curb cut.
Okay. Does anyone else have any thoughts or concerns regarding this, or do we feel we're ready to, based on how this is written, or based on these suggested, maybe I don't want to say adjustments, maybe to the graphics in support of this, whether we have a, I guess we need a motion to set the date or a date proposed for the public hearing. I think the biggest thing in preparing for this is just making sure we have a good presentation, a way to address this to the community, to make sure that that the issues that we're looking at and we're trying to address are well illustrated, so that people understand. Because there's been objection in the past when we start to talk about parking expanding onto residential property and the potential loss for houses, that we would need to be able to just hit those points really strongly, as to why we're considering this, and what the benefits are, and what the issues the city will face if we don't do something to address the parking, especially with certain properties and with the redevelopment of Southfield Road.
Well, if you're looking for potential dates to set a public hearing, November 17th is your next meeting. And then the one after that would be December 22nd. November 17th and December 22nd.
Wouldn't it be December 15th?
Is there a notification time frame limit here we have to?
Oh, yeah, no, December 15th. I'm crazy. Apparently I can't read calendars.
Well, it's the first Tuesday is the first. That always throws me off.
Right, I totally skipped that too.
So the notice requirement is just 14 days, but I tend to agree. I would not agree with you that it would be good to get more residents on board with this and involved in the discussion. So I'm just thinking about updating our graphics and the timeline on having that available for people to see. They're going to be distracted because there's a selection coming up,
and the holidays then after that too. So I
kind of feel like December 15th might be better than the November date, because hopefully things will be sorted through and people will be able to process.
Right, something else.
I agree with that.
And it can still, like, as soon as we have it available, we can put it up on the website.
Mm-hmm.
And just have people be aware of it for a couple of weeks, and then.
Well, and that'll give us an opportunity to, I guess, revisit anything we might need to revisit, if there is anything to revisit, in the next meeting.
Yeah.
In November. So I think that sounds like a good plan.
So I'll make a motion to set a public hearing date for the suggested amendments to the zoning ordinance related to the parking of special land use in the R1 district on December 15th, 2020.
Second.
Those in favor?
Roll call. Board Member Julieza,
Yes.
Board Member Cantor,
Yes.
Chair Pietrowski,
Yes.
Board Member Stansberry,
Yes.
Board Member Thompson,
Yes.
Board Member Fobbs, Board Member Hammond,
Yes.
motion carried.
Okay. The new business item closed. We'll move on to old business and tabled items. And we'll start off with the new item A. And first we'll entertain a motion to remove that item from the table, cannabis introductory discussion.
I'll make a motion to remove cannabis introductory discussion from the table.
Second.
Those in favor?
Board Member Cantor,
Yes?
Chair Pietrowski,
Yes.
Board Member Stansberry,
Yes.
Board Member Thompson,
Yes.
Board Member Fobbs, Board Member Hammond,
Yes.
and Board Member Huiza.
Yes.
Motion carried to remove from the table.
Okay. Just trying to bring up.
Shall I jump right in?
Yep, go ahead, Jill.
All right. You may recall back in early 2019, I believe, the city held a town hall meeting to talk about the changes in laws as they pertained to marijuana facilities. That was at the point where the recreational use of marijuana and the provisions for that changed as a result of an election, a ballot measure. And the informational meeting was really just about updating the community on what the changes in law meant. At the time, there really wasn't any idea about one way or the other. It was just to give some information. Not too long after that, then council, and actually at that meeting, I believe, council had said they would create a study committee to explore the uses that were associated with the new law and consider the pros and cons and explore whether or not the city wished to pursue opting in or opting out. So the city did opt out originally to give time to do that study. So with, I believe it was in July or August, July, I believe that the study committee reported back and made a recommendation that the city move ahead and opt in to permitting certain uses, facilities associated with recreational marijuana in the community. And so at the direction of council, city attorney and I have been looking at comparable ordinances in other communities to develop both municipal code language that would permit these facilities as well as zoning ordinance language that would regulate their placement and other standards associated with permission of any kinds of use. So to the end of the zoning discussion, I put together the informational memo, just as you would see for any of the other uses or changes in ordinance language that we would present to you in this format, where we talk about, we provide you with an introduction, we talk about some of the associated issues with that, what the current language says, potential impacts and considerations, and then what you might want to consider as we begin our discussions of this. So in the memo, we talk about the different facility types. So generally growing, processing, testing, and transport facilities. Those are typically indoor uses. They're generally industrial in nature. There may be micro businesses that have a grow component, but they also sell to the public, and provisioning centers that are essentially retailers. Looking at issues related to compatibility with existing uses, buffering or distance requirements, and some of the questions that we would have for you on the direction that you would like to see zoning standards be created. So I'm hearing myself echoing in somebody's computer, and I find it so distracting. I'm sorry. So at that point, I think I'll just let you digest the introduction. And then maybe I'll see if the city attorney has any additional comments that he wants to add for the conversation, to guide the conversation today.
Thanks, Jill. So yeah, I think what Jill has already referenced and touched on is primarily the topic or the feedback that we're looking to get tonight from the Planning Commission relates primarily to those components that are going to go into the zoning ordinance, because as she said, this is going to be a multi-ordinance type of an endeavor. There's going to be the zoning, then there's also going to be the general ordinance application requirements, vetting process, and that's something that while we are working on that as well, this is going to be, that's more probably a function of the city council than it is so much of the planning commission, but it is still something that that this body will see. So yeah, for tonight, I think primarily we're looking for those impact considerations and feedback from the planning commissioners as to thoughts or concerns that you may have. Council has already weighed in a little, city council's already weighed in a little bit with respect to the types of facilities that they envision in the city. They are looking primarily at three types, potentially transport, provisioning centers, and then possibly testing facilities. Although the transport, we had some discussions about that, and just based on the size constraints on our commercial properties, it might be pretty difficult for on-site storage of vehicles and things of that nature to actually make that type of facility work. So probably realistically looking at testing facilities and then provisioning centers as being the two primary areas that would be permissible within the city.
So based on that, Scott, it sounds like we should spend most of our focus on thinking about what the ordinance requirements would be just for those types of facilities. So, we shouldn't be, for example, considering the restrictions or any ordinance related to things like you suggested, storing transport vehicles and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, logistically, and I think some of the council members had envisioned, okay, a smaller, not more of an independent type transporter that's going to have one or two vehicles, but even that, I don't really anticipate that being a competitive or viable business plan in this industry. I think it's going to be more large scale, and I just don't see that as something that we would fit in our community. Same thing, I mean, with there are some smaller scale grow facilities, but it was just I think it was in the paper yesterday, Orion Township is opening up a 54,000 square foot or breaking ground on a 54,000 square foot facility. Obviously something of that magnitude and size is not good. There's no place to put it in the city. Even micro business, which is kind of a one-stop. I mean, they're going to grow they can grow up to 150 plants on site, and then there's going to be a provisioning component in there. Everything is kind of done. Jill and I had an opportunity to go through a facility, a very well planned out and very technologically advanced facility that I don't even envision something like that being able to fit in our commercial corridor, just based on the size of that facility. So while I'm not saying it's impossible, I think it's probably unlikely that we would attract a lot of interest in those types of facilities. So I think it's better we focus our attention on what we do anticipate, the provisioning and potentially processing and then testing.
Scott, quick question. The committee came back with a suggestion that we do opt in, but we have not opted in yet, have we?
Correct.
That's correct. So their recommendation was that the city explore the feasibility of this, and then the direction that we received from council was that we prepare ordinances, like I said, zoning and the general ordinance language on how this process is going to work. And then once all of that is complete, that'll be presented to council, and then council will make a final determination. But all indications point to that this is something that the city supports and is looking to obviously directing us to undertake. This is not a it's not something that, and that's the reason why the moratorium period was the sunset, with the extension of the sunset on the moratorium, was to give us ample time to complete these and to have all the information and do all the back work, so that it's not something that's just quickly put together and put out there, because it is there's pretty significant impacts, and we do anticipate that there's going to be substantial interest in the city of Lathrup Village for these users.
Did the committee say why they thought we should opt in? Besides, I mean, what benefit is it to the city? Is it a revenue stream, or was there?
Well, I mean, I can't speak. We don't have any of the committee members here this evening, but I was not part of that committee. But it certainly, a revenue standpoint is not the reason why, and that has been my suggestion. You don't do this because you think it's going to pave all your streets, or while there certainly will be a revenue generator to the city from opting into this, in terms of there's application fees and licensing fees, and then there's also the city would then be available to receive a pro rata share of the excise tax that's placed on the sale of the product. So and that, again, that would be applicable to provisioning centers, not so much testing facilities, the others. But I think they looked at it as an opportunity to bring new businesses, create potential job opportunities for Lathrup residents, and just maybe utilize an opportunity to improve our commercial corridor. Again, like I said, a lot of these facilities are very, very professional. They put a lot of money, a lot of investment into the property, into the building that they're going to be utilizing, and I think that could be a probably the most significant factor that committee looked at in making their recommendation.
Okay.
Yeah, the only other one I can think of that you missed there, Scott, was also, I think they indicated that there are several studies showing property values actually do tend to go up with these facilities, and I think they quoted that to us as well.
Oh, and there were kind of like the businesses that follow the other, not necessarily industry related, but there are some other types of you open up a movie theater, you're going to get a restaurant type of a situation.
Yeah, they can tend to be catalyst businesses.
So what kind of input do we have, or information do we have regarding, the target types of facilities and how they might fit into our commercial district? And is the nature of the businesses that we are, I guess, focusing on geared more towards the busy strip of, say, Southfield Road versus like 12 Mile, where maybe the properties have a different size or character to them that would facilitate a certain aspect of business versus say more, let's say, foot traffic for like a provisioning center. Or
I think that's one of the biggest factors that we're looking for input from, and input from this commission on, is that obviously provisioning centers are going to have parking, traffic, ingress, egress concerns and issues, and those are going to be factors. Also, proximity of these facilities to schools, parks, churches, things of that, security concerns. Those are a lot of the things, I think, whereas some of the I'll call less intense uses, a testing or a safety compliance facility is you're not going to have the end user coming in and out of that product, in and out of that facility. You're going to have maybe 5 or 6 employees working at that facility, and then again, my understanding of it is that it's they're not bringing a whole semi truck of product to be tested. They take a sample of each lot or run of it, or I guess whatever, however you want to classify it. And then those are tested for safety compliance. So it's not that is less of an intense use. And again, that's one of the reasons why we felt that, although not something where the city is going to collect a tax or anything off of, but it is a viable business and something that could occupy an otherwise vacant commercial property.
And one thing I was just thinking about, just reading through the notes in the memo about potential impacts and considerations, is about energy and water consumption, specifically for growing facilities. It just made me think about the issue that we had with the restaurant on 12 Mile Road that wasn't disposing of their grease properly, right? And the whole thing that we had to go through with dealing with that situation. So I think it'll be important for us, even if a grow facility isn't necessarily the primary use case in this scenario, the primary user of the ordinance, that we make sure that part of the ordinance has language related to not just the use of resources, but also the disposal of waste.
Yeah, again, a lot of these facilities, and I think maybe that would be applicable if we were to do, allow for the micro business, but a lot of these higher end facilities, and that's what, we as a city would like to target and try to cultivate our ordinance to promote those types of organizations coming into the community. A lot of those are they recycle every condensation, everything, and use that for watering, so that they are pretty self-contained. Jill and I saw that
The one that we saw was.
Yeah, and that's
but we are aware of the ones that aren't as that don't pay as much attention to that. And I think those are the ones that we want to try to, having been to a facility that seems like it really was paying attention to those kinds of things, we want to make sure that we create ordinance language that supports that similar attention to detail.
That's why I bring it up. Right? If it's in the ordinance that, that we have some guidelines around disposal of waste, for example.
Right, and it is one of the items on there, how's waste handled, where is it stored? Are there any hazardous materials? There should be specific standards that apply to that. That public safety is aware of hazardous materials stored on site and that they have worked through any kind of a security plan or safety plan just to ensure that that those things are stored safely, and if there is some sort of a incident, that they're able to know how to take care of that.
When we talk about something like that, hazardous waste as an example, do we have a tangible understanding of what that waste or what that is, what the process is, and what that potential impact is, so that we can consider it appropriately in terms of proximity to whether it's even just residential, which is to some degree here we may be threading some needles with, how do we accommodate it and yet put forth some limitations that are reasonable, that other communities consider, that other residents or people within that community consider important to maintain a quality of their community.
Right. Well, that's a great question in terms of thinking about setbacks and buffers to residential areas, because that's certainly an issue that we have in Lathrup Village because everything is adjacent to residential. How far away can we realistically be
Right.
while still even really allowing them? So I think there's going to have to be some recognition that these are going to go in areas that will be up against residential. So knowing that, how do we make sure that any issues that we might anticipate are taken care of in our ordinance?
Right, and have a good understanding, and so that the public has a good understanding of what the expectations are in allowing a facility to be in a particular location, whether that's traffic, just people coming and going, whether it's a increased crime risk in any sort of manner, if if there's safety related to, hazardous materials processing, if there's, I guess, service traffic related to the operation of that business. We need to understand what all those things are so that we can, make an appropriate judgment on where they might fit into the community as best as possible. I think also when I get at the discussion of what type of facility, where does it want to be from a business owner's standpoint, where do certain things belong? When we talk about testing and we think, well, that's not a high traffic type of facility, that strikes me as something that doesn't necessarily need to be on Southfield Road. On the other hand, if it involved quantities of material that could become a crime threat or something of that nature, is it not better to have it in a more trafficked area so that it is maybe, let's say, better protected and not kind of off by itself and creating any sort of sense of risks for break-ins or something along those lines?
Yeah, you mentioned that there are only 2 or 3 types of facilities that the city would really be looking at. Can we, from the city standpoint, can we identify and say we only want testing and provisioning and nothing else other than those 2?
Hmm.
I mean, because I think we should start with what we want and just eliminate what we don't want.
Mhm.
You're not going to get a growing facility because you need square footage, to do it in its interior. So we just don't have the land for that. So we know we're not going to have growing, and we only want provisioning. And I'm trying to say this as supportive because I don't think we should do it at all. But if we're going to do it, if we're only going to do testing and provisioning, then we should start with, we're only going to do testing and provisioning. Then we only have to focus on those 2.
Mhm.
But I
Yes.
don't know if that's, that's something we can.
You're able to do that. You're even able to say how many of those that you would like to have. You could say, we think that we could support 3, we could support 6. You may not have a limit. It may be 1. That's another question. And it's a question for, in terms of the separation too. So Scott had mentioned, certain distance away from schools and churches and parks. What about distance from each other? Is there a benefit or a drawback to having the uses right next to each other, maybe dueling dispensaries, filling a block, or saying, no, they have to be separated by a certain distance? Those are other questions for you as well.
And that was my recommendation. One of my recommendations to council when we had this discussion was starting out with, instead of opening the floodgates and saying, all right, we're going to take 4 provisioning centers and 3 or 4 testing facilities. Let's start out with a smaller number, because you can always add if it's going well and there appears to still be a demand. We can always add more after the fact. It's a lot harder to take them away once we authorize them and find out that, oh no, this was a disaster to open up 5 or 6 facilities. So
I think we talked about a couple of each.
Yeah, when I think about it, I think about if you've got one, then somebody has like the market. If you have 2, you have competition. Once you start to talk about more, you become a I guess a focal point or more of a I don't know, destination, and do you, how much of a particular business do you want to kind of put a heavy emphasis on for the community? In other words, does the community want to become known for having a plentiful number of provisioning facilities? And
as an alternative, if the community could be known for having a whole bunch of testing facilities, and that's a really quiet business, right? As compared to a provisioning facility, right? So It's like
Well,
the same thing from the opposite perspective.
You're right, Jason, but keep in mind, most of the testing is done at the growing facility because your product is there. It's just like manufacturing. You test
The-
it where you manufacture it most of the time.
But my understanding is these testing facilities that we're talking about here are third parties that validate that there aren't any carcinogens and that the THC level is in the certain range and stuff like that. So you can get certification that your product is safe. And
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the requirements under the state is that if you can't have one entity can't hold the same, be the producer and the tester. It has to go to a third party. So Jason's right. That would be a lot quieter business. Again, one of the things I think the city, although we're cautioning them against relying a lot on this as a revenue source, one of the things they are looking towards and do anticipate seeing some benefit from is the tax revenue that is associated with the provisioning center. So I think I anticipate that city council would be looking for more than just the testing facilities in the city.
So do we have a sense of how large a provisioning center? I mean, just, to be operational, competitive with other businesses that are going to be established, would need to be, and where that might fit into the fabric or into the properties that we have.
I think that you would think of
Do
them
we-
just as any other retailer.
Yeah.
So just like, the old Verizon shop. I guess the other question that I was thinking about, which is why the next one I'm going to say is the Vintage Village, and that was my next question
The
was, is there a
storefront.
concern over, and is there a concern over distance from other businesses like that?
So like 3,000 to 5,000 square feet, I think would be like a typical size. I mean, that's an average retail storefront.
Are any of
And
our
Jill-
existing businesses that currently sell liquor looking to participate in this business?
I don't believe they can do it at the same facility.
Okay.
So they may choose to do that as a separate entity.
Yeah, on a separate location.
And you can further specify that, I believe, that no alcohol be sold on premises and things like that.
Is the only distance requirement in the law the 1,000 feet from schools?
Yes.
Okay, and we don't currently have a school, correct?
Currently, that's true. But there are other distance requirements that you can impose.
Is that
Right,
distance
so
requirement?
We can add other distance requirements, but the only distance requirement that's actually in the law is 1,000 feet from school.
Right, and that can be modified as well, I think, right, Scott?
I believe I think it's that one you can't change the
Okay.
distance on.
Is
but
it the places of worship one that you can change?
yeah, I think so. I'd have to double check
Maybe
it.
that
But
one wasn't even in there
you know,
anymore.
one of the things we did talk about was,
Mhm.
Jill said we currently don't have any schools right now, but we do need to be mindful that we do have properties that potentially could be used as a school, and that's something that I think you want to make sure you're not limiting or prohibiting a potential use of a building by allowing for it. So I think we that's something that we talked about, having either a buffer from a active school or a property that could or potentially be utilized as a school.
Or from a park, which is almost the same
Park,
thing.
correct.
How do they
Oh, and-
define schools? I mean, when you see increasing number of like storefronts or facilities for like higher education, college, university level, occupying business, to have their local or maybe something that's more local to an urban area that is apart from where the base school operates. Not that I'm seeing those businesses in Lathrop.
Is our bartending school still open?
Yes, our bartending school is still
And
open.
does
Yeah,
that
I think
technically
it's-
considered part of a school under the definition?
I thought it was geared
think
more
it's-
towards K through 12,
I
but
think so too.
I could be mistaken on that. I'm not really up on it.
Right.
I will
And
say,
it's-
like, when I look at the memo that Joe put together, you know, like the DDI, I've got my DDA hat on right now. I mean, they have not talked extensively about this. I've asked them to, you know, I told them about this meeting. I don't know if they're really going to be supportive of having any sort of facility within that core village center, you know, which, I mean, but that also gets to that same kind of fits it within that same distance requirements of parks or potential properties that could serve as a school or that are large enough for that. And there is the our church right there as well. So
Right. So 1,000 feet from the parks does kind of encompass the village center area.
okay.
I think consideration should also be made specific to the South Oakland shelter and other similar uses that there may be that we want to have a distance requirement from that.
We have to be, is it schools, any school? I mean, we have
It's public or
Southfield.
private that provide
Southfield, Lathrup.
education. Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be in our community. It could be within boundaries. It's
I think that's fair. I don't think
across-
that you should, like, if there was a spot that was across the street from Southfield and there was a school there,
yeah,
I
right.
think that would not be a good idea.
Exactly.
yeah.
That's and then I hadn't heard it stated yet, so I wanted to understand what the regulation is, but it makes sense.
Mhm.
Jill, just to follow up, we do have the municipality has an ability to reduce the distance requirement from a school. It indicates public or private school providing education in kindergarten or of any grades 1 through 12.
So I wanted to go back to Les's comment about moving this conversation along, as I wanted to understand from you, Scott and Jill and Susie, as to what you would wish from us in producing an initial output. So it seems to me that there's been a committee. The city council has thought about this, and also recalling the citywide meeting that we had previously. And it seems to me that we're narrowing now these options. And I wondered if the next step for us, if you want more input, is to whatever those are, the provisioning and the testing, and what are those key questions that we could perhaps formulate to help us, and to maybe for us to sort of go through that list so that we move towards a concrete initial document. So I wonder if is that what you're asking from us here? Because I think what we're all saying here is obviously those considerations are going to be part of that discussion, whatever the next discussion might be. But I wonder if we can imagine right now, because I don't think that we're going to come up with some sort of a document or an output from this conversation, is to come up with a format by which we can arrive at that point.
Right. So in some of the questions, and I appreciate you trying to direct us to a productive outcome here.
Thank you.
I think that really the questions, some of the things are you concerned about, really, what are your concerns with compatibility issues? So we know existing uses, like residential, we understand that there's potential concerns with that. But are we concerned about the concentration of these uses, or do we want to have them spread out? What other considerations do you have in terms of some of the negative impacts that you'd like to see addressed in regulatory language? But primarily, first and foremost, where do you think they're appropriate? Is there a separation that you feel is important to maintain, which may influence the number? And if you have a number, that you'd like to see it limited to, we can talk about that. And if you don't, we can just see how it all shakes out when we look at the distancing requirements and the locations.
I like Scott's recommendation to start small in terms of sort of piloting this for the city, because it can always be expanded if it is deemed a viable business here. But so first of all, it's maybe if we can sort of decide on whatever the next discussion we might have, which is, okay, provisioning and testing. Maybe then the number, and I know I'm probably getting ahead of this, but what I think might be productive is for a facilitator like Jill or Scott or Susie, for a facilitator to help us get through this checklist of things that we ought to consider.
Well, we can help you with the language itself. So we're going to handle like the things that I know, because I've worked with you for a long time. I know the things that are important to you. I know that trash is important. We're gonna make sure that things are enclosed. We're gonna make sure that there's a plan for waste management. We're gonna make sure that there's hazardous materials are taken care of. Hours of operation, you already have those standards for that. Are there specific concerns beyond what we already know in our zoning ordinance in terms of our hours of operation? Are there other concerns that you have about parking, about traffic, specific to security, lighting, that you want us to explore so that you can understand the issues better? For example, security. Everybody's talked about the fact that they want to make sure that these are safe and that they're safe on site and they're safe in the neighborhoods. Have you seen, driven by any facilities that either have somebody sitting outside in a car, a security person, or someone standing outside of a business as a security person? And how that makes you feel when you drive by there versus not seeing that, but understanding that maybe that there's security cameras and things like that? Is that something that people might have thought about at all?
I would say, Jill, personally, that if it's a facility that requires the presence of a security person to actually be safe, or because it kind of presents the message that there's a potential threat against safety, which would be a strong negative, I think, for this community.
Well, I guess here's the question. Jill, if before they were renovating Bank of America, the security guard was outside. He stands there all the time. So I think it depends on the facility. Right up on 12 Mile, he was there all the time. But I guess to move the discussion forward, I think we should at least agree that we're going to limit the facilities to testing and provisioning, no more than 2 of each, and not in any proximity of each other. And they should be allowed in any of the business district as long as they fit the guidelines for those districts. And at least that way, now we frame what we're going to be working with.
Yeah, I also think one low hanging fruit is the last bullet in the memo, which is the permitted uses. To me, this isn't any different than an alcohol license, right? So it should absolutely be a special land use.
Is there any perception here that the location of one of these businesses is a deterrent to the interest of other businesses? As opposed to, I think it was suggested earlier that property values increase, in adjacencies, and granted, I could see that from the standpoint of foot traffic, but is that the case, or what do we know?
I think it's still a little bit early to make a determination.
Okay.
Also, like a provisioning center in Ferndale is going to be different than a provisioning center in Lathrup Village, right?
So the only recent one that I drove past, and it was in Redford, and I mean, it was like going past, I said, oh, this is here. Okay. And I didn't really get a strong impression one way or another, other than judging what type of building it was in, and that it seemed to have a decent amount of traffic around it. And I think it was a provisioning center, but I didn't really explore it beyond that. So
Would you think that the testing facilities have to be special land uses also? I can see the
Yes.
dispensary because I think it's very, or provisioning center, it's very similar to, like you said, stores that sell alcohol.
would we do this for like a medical lab type? I mean, I'm having
Right, that's sort of what I'm thinking.
this like association with a medical laboratory. We wouldn't. I don't know that we would do that.
Hmm.
That we don't have any special criteria for a medical laboratory, but then, we're not talking like, a level 4 or, what is it, a B3, B4, the high level, hazardous biological material that you're dealing with. So, I mean, certainly something like that, which, there would certainly be probably some, reservations on something like that. But this is a more basic, I imagine it as being like a non-threatening. There isn't a lot of, uh, from a science standpoint, anything that's being done there regarding testing that's in any way harmful or needs a special use.
Yeah, I think so too. And I was thinking about like special land uses relative to things like gas stations, right, which are required by law, but like you need to have those checks and balances in place just because of the nature of how that business operates, what facilities are required. For something like this, it's not an issue. I mean, it's going to be a nondescript thing. You may not even know what kind of business is operating inside of the building where a testing facility is.
It would still
So
have the standards associated with it.
Right.
I mean, I'm a little on the other end of that. I'm still thinking it's probably better to still have this come before the planning commission and council, even for a testing facility, because we really don't know what, or at least not yet, what is involved with these, how much traffic, how much product, when is it coming in, when is it leaving, what type of, so I think having that extra level of scrutiny is not a bad thing. And I don't think that it necessarily has to be overly involved. I think I anticipate that with provisioning centers those are going to be more involved, probably lengthier special land use processes, more people at public hearings, things of that nature. Whereas I think that while it might be quicker, I do still think it's worthwhile to have that extra set of eyes, so to speak, looking at what are they proposing, how's it going to fit within our city, and kind of ensure that it's that quiet, nondescript business that we're looking for.
If that stuff is still under development and we don't fully understand it, then I would totally agree with that.
So Jill and Sri, Lathrup is not the first to consider this. And so I look to the lessons and the formative lessons from other maybe small cities like us, and what processes, so that we are indeed efficient about in our consideration. I don't think that we need to start, from the very, very beginning. We've had voices of residents already. I'm sure there are other cities, perhaps maybe not as small, that have gone through this process, and let's learn from them so that we can be more direct about this process, rather than just sort of, throwing it at us and say, what are these things that you want in consideration. I think that this has been done many times. Let's learn what other cities have learned, and I know that they are as concerned about their community as we are.
Right. So we have examples to draw from many other communities. One of the concerns, though, is that this is very new in Michigan. And so in terms of lessons learned, we're not exactly sure what they are yet here. So, but we have other resources from other communities across the country, places where they are working on, and they've done this for years. So certainly there are things that we can look to in other places. What I think is helpful though is to have a framework for understanding what this community wants, so that we don't just say, well, this looks like a good ordinance, but if it doesn't fit your community, it's not a good ordinance for you. So that's why this conversation and sort of thinking about it from, you know, the bones of it, if you will, helps us to look for things in different ordinances that work and that work together and that work for you. So right now I'm hearing, I heard one suggestion and that it was supported, I think, that no more than 2 of each of these at the moment, which is something that we can look at, not close together. So we're going to have some sort of a distance requirement, special land use for both testing and provisioning centers, making sure that they would be compatible with other uses that are permitted in the district. So probably largely this will be the mixed use district and the commercial vehicular district. If we're considering the 1,000-foot away from parks and schools, then it would not include the village center. And I see some heads nodding, so that I think is good. With that, I think we understand that there's concerns about traffic and parking and the impact to residential, the trash, the lighting. Are there any size requirements, things that you would feel like would be too big or things that you would feel like would be too small? Is there any kind of a feeling about that one way or another? If there was a small 1,000-foot, I don't know that there would be necessarily something that small, a provisioning center, like a little boutique kind of a thing. They found a little niche somewhere. Maybe a counter at Domino's, like, I don't know, whatever, like a small little compatible use where we're gonna share space. Is there a concern with that? Or is there also on the other end of the spectrum, like we don't want a 20,000 square foot provisioning center. Like, I don't know if that's a thing either. Just trying to get some feelings from you all on that.
You know, Jill, I think you might want to wait until the person that wants to open up the facility brings it to us in their plan.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a right answer to that.
Because if they wanted a 15,000 square foot provisioning center and they're willing to tear down one of these existing buildings and build up something brand new, we might want to consider that.
Right, and it might be a very large building that could have other uses in it. That, I guess, is a third question related. Are there any, aside from mixing it with alcohol, are there any other uses that you would say are not compatible? Should this be a standalone business always, or could it be mixed with something else?
Well, does it go without saying, like, no childcare facilities? Like if somebody wanted to do like, you know, I mean, if if the distance requirement applies to schools, does it also apply to childcare?
Does not, but we can also add that in.
I mean, that would make sense to me.
Yeah.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Can we require them to like mix with like restaurants?
Yeah, why not?
That's going to ask that question a little differently, but.
But I don't think you'd necessarily want to prohibit it. Like, you're not going to allow it to be, we're not allowing the consumption facilities, so that's not a real an issue.
Okay.
So, but you could, I mean, you come in and get carry out, or you come in and sit down and have a meal that's not related to.
And this is somewhat off topic, but just consumption facilities, I mean, that includes like places where you can smoke or and eat that and eat like foods prepared with it or whatever, right?
Right. You're not allowing that. And you would not make sure I understood totally. Right. And that would not be permitted within the 2 that you're going to allow.
No, we did say that we were prohibiting an individual business from being able to sell both cannabis and alcohol.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But if in a multi-use building, there's a restaurant that's serving alcohol, right? It's a different business. That's okay.
Would it be that it's not taking alcohol out to go? So.
Not carry out, right? Only
I mean,
consumption on site or whatever.
They're separate. I think in the same business they shouldn't be, but if they're in the same building,
I'm imagining like if there was a cannabis provisioning store next to Vintage Village, right?
Joe, what does preliminary evidence say about the combination of alcohol and provisioning of
I
marijuana?
haven't seen specific recommendations on it. I do see it a lot in the ordinances that I've been looking at, that they have limits or they put distance requirements between those things. And they also, many of them also limit them being in the same business space.
Wasn't that originally one, well, I don't know, in one early iteration of the recreational laws that you couldn't, like the 1,000 feet also applied to other liquor stores and bars? Wasn't that part of it? Maybe.
I'm just curious about what the science says about the combination of those. And I mean, you're purchasing a product, you're not consuming it there.
Mhm.
So, you know, I go pick up this.
I think
and
it's more, I don't know that it's necessarily the relation between those two things, but I think it's the concentration of those two uses next to each other. If that makes sense. So like
Well, the
where
thing
you wouldn't,
yeah,
Well,
where if
I'm
you,
sure.
if
Well,
you
I'm-
have a, go ahead.
Mhm.
you're not creating a district the way you would if you said consumption of one, consumption of another, and in proximity where you're you're creating that, you know, ambiance of this is where you go, yeah, alcohol here, recreational marijuana here.
You know, from a business standpoint, I'm sort of trying to understand that there is a possibility of stigma or assumptions about the purchase or the provisioning of these products. And so I'm trying to understand what that might be. And you know, I'm not advocating for one or the other, but it seems to me that is a consideration that we ought to have good data and good information on the impact of those combinations.
Right. I think one of the things that we'll do is when we come back with some, like, we'll come back with a loose draft. And then some of these things that you've raised tonight, we'll have done some research on and see if we can come up with some answers to your questions.
One other thing too that I wanted to ask that we didn't touch on. So there is still a differentiation between a recreational license and a medical license. And so we wouldn't, I think in theory, a lot of other communities do allow for both a facility to obtain both a recreational license as well as a medical license. There are some requirements generally about separation of the two within the facility, but is that something that you know, we will be looking to support as well? So both medical and recreational facilities.
I mean, I don't see why not. I have been to a few of these facilities in other states. It's a kind of a standard thing.
And I think the trend probably going forward is that you'll see less and less of the medical and probably more of the recreational. But you know, for now, because they do both are still in existence, I think it's something worth addressing.
Maybe, but I know one of the benefits of at least in a state like Colorado, the cost of retail cannabis is much higher than the cost of medical cannabis, right? So that's a reason why people get medical certification cards to be able to buy medical cannabis, right? And that there are businesses that want to continue to support that, and those businesses may also want to be able to sell retail, right?
So Jill, do you feel like you have enough feedback from us, and also given what you understand as our values? I mean, you've been around for so long, and our sort of preferences, and you've heard from the committee and also the initial thoughts from the council, that you probably can sort of create a framework for us so that we have a productive conversation that moves us along in a particular trajectory. So we
think
do
so.
come up with some sort of product.
Yes, I think that we are going to have a good working draft. Hopefully next month, but we need to be working in concert with the city attorney to make sure that the zoning is consistent with the general code. So we'll have to work on our timeline again and make sure that we're in alignment.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we can then, there's nothing to immediately act on this particular item at this point. So we can move on to the next topic on our agenda, I think.
So
Which
I'd like to make
is-
a motion to remove from the table the comprehensive plan update.
Second.
Those in favor?
I had to
Wait.
unmute. I'm sorry. Chair Pietrowski,
Yes.
Board Member Stansberry,
Yes.
Board Member Thompson,
Yes.
Board Member Hammond,
Yes.
and Board Member Huliza,
Yes.
and Board Member Cantor.
Yes.
Motion carried to remove from the table.
Okay, so let's talk about the comprehensive plan update.
I'm going to, oh, Susie, may I please share my screen?
Oh my gosh, come on.
I
Yes.
want to go through, I sent out in the agenda packet the presentation that we didn't get to last
No,
month.
wait, what? No, I don't think I did it. Hold on. I think I still messed it up.
Okay.
Advanced sharing
All right.
options. There we go. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
So what we wanted to do is, before we can move too much further into finishing up the draft plan, we wanted to go through these redevelopment sites. We've talked about them a little bit. We've got a little bit more of a redevelopment concept for them, which I'm really curious to hear what you think about one of them in particular. So let's move right on with that. So this is the first one, is the House in the Wood site. So as you all know, it was first developed in 1927 as the home of Louise Lathrop, and it burned down in 2009 when it was hit by lightning, and the site was cleared. The city did allow the residents to reclaim the site. The idea was that it was going to be a nature preserve, but it was it was all a volunteer effort, and it just really didn't seem like it was a sustainable project. City's got is trying to manage its limited resources and didn't feel like this was a site that was appropriate to continue as a park, given the other parks that are still in the area, in the community, and so have decided this is an area that is ripe for a redevelopment. And the city owns this property. I think a recent idea was to maybe sell it and get for a couple of sites. But it's about 2.5 acres. We took a look at it and wondered what you'd think of a concept that is a little bit more compact, a little bit denser, and gets more housing on site. This is an example of a project in Novi. They're single family homes. So these are single family in a very compact layout with rear facing service areas. And so it's hard to believe, but that site could actually facilitate, I think we had 11 homes here with a center area that would be shared by the other folks in that circle. The nice thing about it is it does maximize the development potential, which is nice because the city owns that property. It does add smaller homes on the site. These could be good for older residents as well as young adults. They're obviously lower maintenance. They've got a lot smaller yard situation and would be easier to maintain. Just another view of that. I forget how many pages that is. Okay, so that's that. So it's a very different concept from, I think, probably what most of you had anticipated. And I wondered what you think of it.
Seems like a very different
Excuse me.
concept to most of the existing homes
Mhm.
in the city
It
too,
is.
right? Which generally have, for the most part, they have some
Mhm.
relatively good sized yards,
Mhm.
right? And a little bit more space and privacy. Yeah, this is really divergent from what we have already. I guess I would have to think a little bit about whether I felt like this is consistent with
Mhm.
how we want the city to develop. Whether we wanted to kind of maintain its, that kind of private, kind of 1950 style bedroom community appeal, or
Mhm.
be a little bit denser like a Novi or a Plymouth or a Lake Orion or something like that.
Well, and keep in mind that this is really the only spot that something like this would happen.
Yeah.
It's not like the whole community would be turning into this type of redevelopment. You're largely built out. So given that you're largely built out, you have two types of housing in the community. You have single family homes on the regular lots, and then you have some townhomes and things on the edges. So this gives you another alternative that's really more integral to a neighborhood, while still providing single family living. It's dense. I mean, I won't try to tell you that it's not. And this is one of those situations where I think we push a little bit to see what you're comfortable with. And if you're not comfortable with any of it, that's fine. It can go back to being, a much smaller 2 to 3, maybe 4 home development. Or if you say, you know what, I like it, but it's twice as big as what I think it should be, we can cut it down in half. So just something to kind of challenge your thinking a little bit. But whatever, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that area is pretty isolated actually too, so it would to some extent limit the effect of it being different.
Mm-hmm.
I
Aerial of that. Yeah, here we go.
I'm intrigued by the concept, and I think I've been, with the prospect of developing what's left in the way that a portion of the original site was developed, left a fairly, I'll call it, in one way it's unique, in another way you might call it awkward compared to what the pattern is that's going on. Aside from maybe a concept that says we create 2 more lots and we have this strange circle in the center that we don't know what to do with. So from the standpoint of providing kind of like a public shared space, like another like park, and access for the public to be able to get to it and maybe enjoy that central circle, I'm a little bit more uncertain about the density and the appearance of and maintaining a sense of the village, particularly when historically the western part of Lathrup has been, quote, the estate section, and now you put in a density of smaller scale homes that might not, or don't have necessarily the same perceived quality to them. I'm toying around just in my head right now as I look at the plan of, does it make sense to, if you want to increase density, to build combination buildings in terms of, or connected in terms of a townhouse sort of arrangement. But I'm also thinking of the number of times I've walked around the circle, and historically it had been wooded, and then we had some of the larger homes in Lathrop developed there, and some of the most modern homes developed there, and suddenly I just don't know fabric wise how this would necessarily fit on the street side of things. So there are aspects of it that I like concept wise, but in terms of, I think there's a balance to be struck between on the outer appearance, on the outer circle, versus what might happen on the inner circle. I take a look at this image that's on the screen now, and I think a little bit more towards the community or the development that was built in, I think it's Beverly Hills off of Lasser, near
13 Mile and Lasser? think Mark froze. Can you guys hear me?
I
Yes.
hear you.
All right, Mark's frozen. But he is talking about another similar development at, I think it's about 13 in Lost, so 13 in Evergreen. Right, so the nice thing about this property is that it is owned by the city. And so whatever the city decides is the right material, the right appearance, the right standards, you're in the driver's seat because you own the property.
Well, Jill, I think it looks nice. I think it's just too big. Half the size would probably be nice. I mean, the houses fit. I mean, you could get the houses there. It would be its own little community within a community.
Mm-hmm.
You've got relatively newer houses outside of it. You'd have new houses inside, but it just seems a bit tight. I think if you dropped it in half, you'd give people a little more space. Did you all have an idea of what the average square foot of the homes were?
I want to say they were like 12 to 1400 square feet, but I can double check. But
No,
I
no, no,
will.
I mean, that's a fairly decent sized home. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
you got a fairly decent sized home, you'd have maybe half the size of the average lot in Lathrup,
Mm-hmm.
but everything would be new. So, but it would probably look really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure about the color coordination like they have up at 13 in Losser, but it would still look nice.
So maybe like a 6 or 7, 8, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think are the 4 in front, are those homes as well, or is that something else?
Yeah, they're homes as well.
Okay. Yep, I think it looks nice. It just I mean, I walk past there with the
Maybe-
dog all the
Yeah.
time. I think it's just a little too dense. Half of it.
Maybe removing every other one on the
Yeah.
front.
Yeah, yeah. They would have to be pretty friendly to all live in that 15 houses on that.
Was
All
this just a concept, or was this worked up with a possible developer?
This is just a concept.
Okay,
Why, you have a developer in mind, Les?
I was just asking.
I'm just curious. You have my phone number.
All right, good.
I got you.
All right, thank you. I want to move on. The next one is 26206 Southfield Road. It's down south of 696 between Rainbow and Mangate. It's been vacant for a really long time. But it's the same size as one of your standard lots. So that's why we picked it. And not only because it's vacant, because it seems like a good model that could be replicated elsewhere. So it's a pretty straightforward concept for redevelopment, using the whole site with parking along the back, bringing the building right up to the road, just as pretty much that is consistent with the zoning ordinance anyway. But just showing a 2-story building here, kind of similar to what we showed you earlier with the parking. Only what we have here is we've got some of this nice ground floor active space, but if we assume that maybe there's residential up on top, some tuck under, we call that tuck under parking that could be accommodated in the back. I guess it could be office up here as well, but this concept was for anticipating some residential up on top.
I like it.
I think that's a great use. I mean, it's just literally an unused parking lot right now.
Yeah, I think it's a
And
nice concept.
the fact that it takes into account the parking, which is such a big problem for us, right, is really great. Yeah, I really like this concept.
I think the biggest
Who owns this?
challenges with the parking in back, creating a, and maybe it's not an issue of walking around to the front, but I keep trying to imagine ways to, when you have a situation like this, that you can attractively get pedestrians through the building or to, or, so that it's not a one-sided building with a service side that's always not kept as well, not as attractive.
Right.
Who owns this building? I mean, this site.
Primerica, not city owned. So
Okay.
I think Bruce gave me a history lesson like 1,000 years ago. It used to be like AAA or
AAA.
something, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was the parking lot for the AAA building.
Oh,
Yep.
wow.
I remember that.
You know, the thought just kind of occurred to me, like, to Mark, kind of your point about like the service entrance. It almost be nice to have somehow find a way to make the entrance to the upper floors like in the center of the building, but I don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'd need to think a little bit more creatively about this, but so you'd end up, have a two-sided building, but
You
I
could
don't
like lose a parking spot and put an elevator, right, and a stairwell,
know.
or maybe 2 parking spots in the tuck-in area.
Are you thinking like a focused entry foyer, like have a central element?
I hadn't even thought that far. It was just a real vague notion.
Just to break the,
Yeah.
the expanse of the building, like by creating an element in between. Just
That's what I was
Maybe
thinking. That's
like
what,
almost like an arcade type of deal.
Mm-hmm.
So you're thinking lengthwise or crosswise through the building when you say that, although either one are concepts that could be considered.
Yeah. I like those. I think this sort of that actually is a standard from the village center, that you have a certain number of entries per length of building. But that could be something that we incorporate into what I think we should do in the future, is have some mixed use standards as well for the rest of the mixed use district. And those would be things that we would want to incorporate in there. So that's cool. The last one is the village center, and the reason we included this again is because it's still there, but we've scaled it back a little bit, and we wanted some input on that. So this was the original concept from 2014, really pretty substantial along Southfield Road. We still had repurposing the existing school. As we've talked about before, really the only historic structure left in the commercial areas on Southfield Road, but seeing it repurposed with a mix of uses inside. The redevelopment concept still keeps the overall village center concept of focused on this area here, and seeing a new road being perpendicular to Southfield Road that's very walkable and vibrant. But instead of having bigger buildings, it's more of maybe multiple family residential, so stacked flats, like built apartment on top of apartment, or live work, something that might be 2 or 3 stories, and maybe row houses along the side that interfaces with closer to the neighborhood, here and here, 2 to 2.5 story row houses.
so just so I'm clear on this, so you're showing development on both sides of Southfield Road. But the initial slide is just focusing on the school, the current
That
school
one's
spot.
just- Right. So that is saying
Not that
that's
one.
sort of
If you go back to the first slide, keep going.
that
One
was the
more.
first one.
That's the first slide.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
So the black box is only part of what you guys are considering.
Right. We looked at the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So again, still considering some sort of uses adjacent to the school on that property, maybe some sort of small outlots, but still focusing on things spreading out from either direction.
So
And
that
it's just-
concept there still, I mean, the city hall still it needs to be accommodated within this. So which is the presumption here that it is the school?
It could be absorbed someplace else, but it
And
would
that
be
you-
in this, it's still envisioned to be in this location. It's just not specified where.
Right, and then you have I mean, one of the outbuildings could be like the police or other municipal service or functions.
Right.
It's pretty cool.
I like the concept. I part of me almost wants to envision the lots that are to the west of the school, getting a higher concentration of focus on the north and south sides, as in terms of so the traffic is off of those side roads, or that becomes more engaged in a retail business, because that kind of brings it more into the neighborhood and starts to orient it in a fashion that doesn't just leave it at Southfield Road. And maybe that's
Here.
kind of in the concept, yeah, there, and even on the other two, on the
Yeah. Mhm.
so I start to envision, okay, how do individual or sections of those buildings, if they're small shops, are the faces on the east-west roads, in as much as they are on Southfield, or at
Mhm.
least in part. I've also envisioned probably something a little more dramatic, which is rather than just having the central road right on the school, coming from the school to the west, is splitting it and having there be a central green space there, and businesses around. But that's probably a bit more dramatic, and maybe more public space than buildings, or than businesses. It
Mhm.
then creates more of a central green, that would be like in and across the street. So, but that's a more dramatic change. So I don't know how, without a wholesale reworking of the center district, at once, how well that could be orchestrated.
Yeah, well, and I feel like, and this is just kind of my own. It's not based on any fact, but one of my thoughts is the more green space or public space we have, the less, the more investment the city has to make financially.
Yep, exactly.
Right. It's not like we got spare change sitting around for.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
The
So some
question
of the ways in,
becomes,
oh, go ahead.
what's the plan that's the right balance between, being, spurring change from what we have now, um, and being enticing enough to a developer to make it,
Mhm.
create the advantages for it to be realized.
Right.
Right. And I think the key is to be flexible. And I think that's what we were trying to show here is some other options that, like row houses or multiple family. I mean, those are things that the market is currently seeing. So maybe we start there instead of, we had thought maybe this would be the catalyst project, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's something over here, or it's something that gets taken down and starts over there or here.
I like the concept of what those would do in terms of helping kind of define,
Mhm.
be creating definition type elements that are transition to the residential, but
Mhm.
establishing the commercial core.
Right.
I like that too.
Yeah. These are some of the imagery that we had associated with it. This was something that I was thinking, the stacked flats or the live work. So like this sort of environment, and that kind of goes, I think, Mark, with what you were saying, like maybe over here, even as we start to begin, focusing on some ground floor uses that might start to engage people, or here where that's allowed to happen. This does include the preferred alternative for Southfield Road. So that is what the boulevard would look like there.
Yeah, I think I've living on the west side of Southfield Road, and walking California, which I do quite a bit routinely. I've even envisioned how the transition of a border at California would look if it, if you want to be dramatic in thinking about, adjustment, how, maybe there's a possibility there, but that's master planning on a much higher level, but looking to take within the boundaries of California, to spur opportunity to create a more, even larger commercial core that takes the focus on the thoroughfare that Southfield is.
Mhm.
I
But
think it may be also a good point to focus on architectural standards in such design, because that is the one which can set the visual standard and
Mhm.
still maintain compatibility between different kind of users and buildings, like have a set of standards just for this site.
Right. And I think that is a good point, because this does change, I think, some of what we had thought maybe with the previous section, the previous ordinances. So we have design standards and we have zoning standards specific to this district, but I don't think they would, I think they would need to be updated to reflect some of these other types of structures and predicting the building heights and their transition. I think that was done many years ago and is probably ready for a refresher.
I don't think the townhomes were quite. They've certainly taken off in other places
Mhm.
since I think that the concept was formulated here.
Right.
I mean,
And these also, these kinds of ideas.
right.
I think that was my last, oh, that was the last one. Yep.
And I like the I think the previous slide, there's imagery there that strikes me like Birmingham and
Mhm.
yep,
Royal Oak.
Royal Oak.
Royal Oak as well. Southfield has some, but they're kind of often by themselves, and
Mhm.
they're not used to define. I think they are, but I don't think the
Yeah.
rest of the development is occurring yet. Let's
Mhm.
just say that. But
I
there's an
think,
attractiveness and a permanence with this and almost historical references when you go back to the item, the
right.
lower right, gables,
Mhm.
masonry. Masonry says urban. It says more permanent, more so than some of the newer materials, which are look a little bit more like simple skins that aren't designed or not intended to last really long and maybe more trendy.
I think that's a really good point, is as an action item for the master plan would to do really to make those standards that would support this type of development, but in a way that really reflects and responds to the context of the surrounding single family residential neighborhoods, because you do have very distinctive architecture. That's what makes your neighborhood so charming. All right, well, that's what I really wanted to focus on. I also wanted to send you the draft that we have so far. You'll recall that we went through we have the market study that'll go in there as well. We have a couple other sections that we're going to be still working on. What we sent is still a working draft, so there may be things that you see in there that don't make sense, but that's because it's still a working document. What we'd really like to do is get with you to finish up the final draft. And I don't think, based on our conversations that we've had over the last few months, I don't think there's any changes to the future land use map that we've talked about. I think that it's pretty much, there's not a lot of room to change things, I don't think. But we'll present that next time and have more of the draft complete, and also start working on the implementation items. So we'll be going back and revisiting the action items that we talked about from a few months ago, and looking at the things that you've accomplished and the things that you still want to do, and building up the new strategies for this master plan so we can get it rolling.
Okay.
After we have the final draft done, we'll ask you to ask City Council to release it to the adjacent community and reviewing agencies. And then we'll have a period of time where they do that. We have that 42-day review period, and then we'll have a public hearing and be off and running.
Great, Jill. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which we have have a motion to take off the, remove from the table the signage ordinance discussion.
Okay, roll call. Board Member Stansberry,
Yes.
Board Member Thompson,
Yes.
Board Member Hammond,
Yes.
Board Member Huliza,
Yes.
Board Member Cantor,
Yes.
and Chair Pietrowski.
Yes.
Motion carried to remove the sign ordinance from the table.
Okay, we had a good deal of opportunity to talk about the signage ordinance during our study session. I'm thinking that we had pretty well worked through many of the issues. We want to summarize those here. I'm thinking that if there's no more discussion, we would quickly make a recommendation on this as well.
So, I mean, during the study session, we had talked about some of the things that we wanted to adjust, right?
Want me to summarize those for you, what I have?
If you could, please.
I
Yep.
can.
Yes, I think that'll get us back around circle.
Okay. All right. So I have, we talked about the backlit signs, and it was suggested that we max that out at 4 inches around the sign letters with no spread. That we don't allow more than 4 inches of that. We include the glow, include the glow around the sign in the sign area, but not allow it to spread more than 4 inches. I think we decided to keep it white.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think that.
We talked about temporary signs, and the concern was that the 12 square foot maximum for one sign was too much, and that should be lowered to 6 square feet. Also a maximum of 24 square feet total versus the 48 that we had in the draft. Does that sound right?
Yep.
Fixing some table references, making sure that it's clear that non-residential temporary signs do require a permit. That the signs that require rigid border are the ones that are greater than 6 square feet. That in the office districts, we add 11 and 12 to further confirm that those are the mile roads that we are referencing. In terms of painted wall signs, we're going to delete it from the prohibited signs, but under the wall signs say that wall signs shall not be painted directly onto a building. And I think that was it.
I think that's it. Yeah.
Awesome. It was good.
So is our action to recommend the amendment
To
to
council.
this ordinance for the, to the council for approval?
Yeah.
So I'll,
Scott, does it need to be a formal motion or?
Because this ordinance appears under the general powers ordinance,
Right.
it'll actually make two separate meeting, first and second reading by city council. So, but what we're looking for from planning commission is just more or less what you did tonight, review it, input, and then your blessings towards city council. So this will, city council will be happy to have this on their next agenda.
yeah, I think we're ready for city council. Take a look at this.
Yep, I would agree with that.
Excellent.
Okay, so that brings us to other matters for discussion, capital improvements plan kickoff meeting.
Look at us. It's October.
Yeah, and we're getting this on the books, people. Get our meeting set. Okay, so as we already figured out earlier, our next meeting is November 17th. I think it would be nice Right now, Mark and Jason, you were on the CIP committee, or at least you were from last year, so I hope you're staying.
Yep.
I was thinking it would be nice to do a brief study session before a meeting next month, and I would like to know if there's anybody that would like to join us.
Really fun.
I think it'd be fun.
I like you doing.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Hey,
You guys cool with
Welcome aboard.
are you cool with doing a quick study session before
Yes,
our meeting next month?
I
Yeah.
am. I can
All
say,
right.
certainly.
Good.
Just try to figure out where it fits into our calendars.
Are you saying right before our next meeting or sometime before the next meeting?
Oh, right before, like how we did today, so like 6 p.m.
Yeah, that would be fine.
works for me.
Excellent. Jill and I will make sure, Jill, Sri and I will make sure that you you have things to talk about beforehand.
Great.
Great, okay. So then let's move on to general communication correspondence, legal update.
Nothing for me. We already kind of went over the updates with the virtual meetings and the study session, so.
Okay. Planning updates?
No, I think we're good. I'll share with you, we had the Michigan Association of Planning Conference about 10 days ago, and virtual. And we did a session, a short 30-minute session. And when we had to do some editing to the video for it, but when it's done, I'll share it with you all because you might find it interesting. Our session was about rethinking the use of streets from vehicles to people. So a couple of examples in there, and it's, like I said, it's kind of short, so I'll send it when it's ready.
Super.
Any updates from staff?
Yeah, I have one that I'm going to give you today. We had tentatively scheduled 3 joint meetings for this year, and we haven't had a single one. But we do have one. We do have a hold for November 30th, which is a Monday, if I am correct. Yes, Monday, November 30th. And I was thinking that given our discussion on cannabis this evening, as well as some of the comprehensive plan stuff, that might be a good time to at least touch base for the year. And have our single joint meeting for the year.
Are you planning to do it in person?
No, we are planning to do it via Zoom.
Okay.
Unless I'm told otherwise by Scott.
Susie, is there do you have a notion on a specific agenda?
Like I said, I think very specifically cannabis, since that is that's obviously something that council wants to move on. So I think that might be a good opportunity for us to talk about cannabis there. And depending on where we're at with the comprehensive plan, that might be a good last point to talk about that. So just those 2 things.
Sure. And if this is a joint, will we have some draft or the framework, Jill, so that it becomes a productive conversation as opposed to sort of reinitiating that, and so that.
Yeah, and I'm springing this on Jill because I'm sure she forgot
like,
about
that's a great idea.
Yeah, go Susie.
If we're not ready for it, we won't do it.
Yeah, we're not.
If we are, then it would be a good opportunity. So I think we'll all figure out what to do with that.
Okay, well, I know that bringing all these folks together is sometimes complex and complicated, and I know everyone appreciates a high utility meeting.
Yes,
Yeah.
we're not going to be hurting cats.
No, and I also am kind of wondering, just thinking out loud, you know, what if I was just kind of thinking about the parking situation, the R1 parking, like maybe that's what we talk about. One of the things that we could talk about at the joint meeting, where it gives more people exposure to what we're talking about. And even, I'm just trying to think of what else we're going to have on that meeting agenda on the 17th of November. We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. But Charo, I promise it's going to be productive. We're not gonna
do it if we don't have anything to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, it's just that we've created a really good initial conversation. You've got a lot of good feedback, and Jill, you're going to frame it for us, and then it would be good for us to move to the next steps as opposed to reinitiating. And
I
that's
agree.
what my concern is. The other
Right.
is when we have a very heavy agenda, I don't know how the commission, Mr. Chair, would view this, is to provide us some markers so that we are, you know, at this point, we should be completing this so that if we see that by 7:30 or 8 o'clock, so that we prioritize, because
We can do that.
otherwise, yeah, I mean, we love talking.
You do. You're really good at it. You guys are really good at it.
But you know, in terms of getting to that, are pieces of the agenda that we all collectively agree as our priorities, I would want us to move through things so that we get the work done for you.
Absolutely.
I agree with that.
I think that we could better focus.
I like it.
So
And give us homework too, I think, for a meeting like that, right?
yes,
There's
so
specific.
absolutely. So I again, this is one where we have heavy agendas. Is put that marker for us, Susie, and at least draft the marker, and we can always come back as a group and say, I don't know if this is achievable tonight, but at least let's stick with some sort of timeline.
Will do.
Yeah, because I'd like to know if it's, you know, a 3 or a 4 hour. If we start at 6, then, you know, I would want to finish at 9. If we start at 7, yeah, I can go out further.
I don't think we need to go 3 hours even.
I don't mind as long as I know in advance.
Good to know, but we'll keep it well under the 3 hour mark.
Please.
No worries.
Well,
and that is all I have for you though.
Awesome.
All right, I just got a real quick reminder. There's a ballot initiative on the ballot on November 3rd. We've done a couple town halls, virtual. We're doing another one this Thursday at 7 p.m. Information on the website, also on fixlvroads.com on how to connect. It's fixlvroads.com. It's everything you need to know about the proposal, and hopefully anybody who's watching or you guys will join in.
Thanks for all
Thanks,
your
Bruce.
leadership, Bruce, on that initiative.
Yes.
You're incredible.
Did we ever open it up for public comment?
Yeah, we did.
In item 5 much earlier.
Yeah, I don't remember us doing that, but it's been a long meeting.
We did.
Nobody came out to talk about roads.
I was shocked too.
Very quiet.
Right. On that note,
can I make a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Yeah. Second.
Good night,
All
everybody.
right, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great
everybody.
night.